So tonight we're going to do quick review, and then I'm going to let Dee start chapter 14. But before we do, as we walk through these chapters, I'm going to do them very, very briefly. I'm going to have y'all think about what you remember as I mention each of the chapters, but I'm going to mention them in the context of this war script that we've been talking about that helps us see all the way through Revelation, right? Chapter 1, introduction to the king, right? The protagonist, right? The hero. So that's chapter 1. Chapters 2 and 3, he's this king who's coming to rescue his citizens, writes letters to his citizens. That's chapters 2 and 3. Chapters 4 and 5, you move away from all that going on in the kingdom to the throne room, right? Where you have the one who sits on the throne, and he begin to have these rallies, or you know, if you want to call them pep rallies, but if you remember before you went to the football game, you always had the pep rally. Everybody get fired up. So, but again, rallying of the troops. If you've seen Braveheart, you remember, you know, Mel Gibson riding back and forth and everybody going, ah, right? So that's chapters 4 and 5. And chapters 4 and 5, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, doesn't it? Yeah. So at the end of chapter 5, who's involved? All of God's creation throughout the universe. They're all saying, yep, bring it, bring it. And that's what we see in chapter 6. Not my phone. For a change. All right, so we get to chapter 6, and if we're thinking about it, oh, by the way, we can do one more thing. If we're talking about chapters, we can do this not on every chapter, but on a lot of the chapters. If you're thinking about chapter 5, who's the main person that gets brought out in chapter 5 as, you remember? Who's worthy, right? Who is worthy to open the scroll, right? Lion of the tribe of Judah, root of David. So we're talking about Jesus. So chapter 5, why would you make the connection with chapter 5 with Jesus being the one to open the scroll? Anybody tell me? Your Bible numbers, what's the number 5 for? Grace. It's grace. It's the number of grace, okay? So we get to chapter 6. And chapter 6, are we thinking good or bad for that number? Okay, so what happens in chapter 6, according to our war script? The 4 horsemen, right? So we got the seal judgments. This is the proclamations of war by the king. And so he begins to send out those waves of troops. And what's the first horse? Who's that? That would be the Antichrist. So again, if you're thinking chapter 6, not a good number. First horse out the gate is the Antichrist. So that might help you there. So we have those seals poured out, you know, and the horsemen and all that. You get to chapter 7. Chapter 7, good number, bad number? Good number. Okay, so what's in chapter 7? Because it's kind of a pause, remember? 144,000. 144,000 is what? 12 times 12 times 10 times 10 times 10. Isn't that interesting? Huh. It's also 12,000, 12,000s. So, you know, you have all those numbers going on and all that. And does that mean that I don't take them literally? No, it does not. It means I do take them literally. It's just that they line up. There's a reason for them to be used like that. And we know that, you know, we're thinking about the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So, in our war script, who are these guys? Jewish, redeemed, they're believing Jews, right? So we know they're in the tribulation, but they've become believers. And so as a result, they're sealed for a mission, which would make them what? Soldiers of some kind. Now, could they be spiritual soldiers? Yes, because when we overcome, you know, how do we do that? We do that by the word of our testimony and by the blood of the Lamb, right? So those kinds of ideas all kind of come together there. But again, chapter 7, think about the 144,000. Good number. So you got the soldiers, and then you got the number of fallen is the second part of chapter 7, right? And the martyrs who come out of the tribulation. So they've already died early in the tribulation. So then you have 8 and 9, which doesn't really make, you can't use the numbers so much for 8 and 9. But what's in 8 and 9? Does anybody remember? Okay, you have the initial proclamations of judgment that send out the initial waves of war in chapter 6, the horsemen and all. And then the next thing that happens when they move to the enemy's castle, they arrive at the enemy's kingdom, how do they announce their arrival? Trumpets. That's chapters 8 and 9 are the trumpet judgments, okay? So having the trumpet judgments fulfilled, that leads us to chapters 10 and 11, which kind of come to, fit together pretty well. Chapter 10, good number, bad number? Good number, okay. What's in chapter 10? The little book. The little book and the big angel. Yeah, little book, big angel, all right? So yeah, and I like to say that angel was a perfect 10. So that's one of those things that helps me remember. That's a mighty angel, strong angel, big angel, right? Yeah, he's a 10. All right, so that hopefully will help you, kind of connect those dots there. And of course, that angel looked like, what did he look like?
Rainbow, clouds.
Rainbow was part of it. Clouds were part of it. What? A storm coming. There you go. And he's representing the storm that's about to come in the second half of the tribulation, and that's why it's in chapter 10. So we got chapter 10 fitting together. That leads us to chapter 11. And how do we know what's in chapter 11? Yeah, he's already doing it. Yeah, I've got several people doing it already. How do you remember what's in 11? The two witnesses. Yeah. Okay. So the two witnesses, when does all this activity happen? Middle of the tribulation, okay? So both 10 and 11, like I said, they fit together because they both are right about that midpoint, and almost everything in those two chapters tell us that it's happening at the midpoint and point to the middle of the tribulation. That led us up to chapter 12, and I mentioned to you that chapters 12 through 14 are doing something different. They're pausing to give backstory. They're telling us about the characters of the personages who are going to be the primary players throughout the Great Tribulation, or the last 3.5 years. So that's why it began with the main character or personage who's involved in the Great Tribulation. And what was how was she represented? As a dragon? No, as a woman, right? So in a woman, what does she look like? Sun and moon and 12 stars, which tells us that she can only be Israel. Has to be Israel. Can't refer to anything else in terms of the word picture that they're drawing there. So first character out of the gate when we're talking about backstory is Israel. So in chapter 12 we got introduced to Israel, and who else? The dragon. And the dragon is Satan. All right. Obviously a major player in the Great Tribulation, right? What else? The child, okay, or the son, right? Jesus is the son or the child, all right? And then one last character in chapter 12? Michael. And why is Michael important?
He's an angel.
He's an angel? What else? Protector of Israel. There we go. Guardian or protector of Israel. So, that's 12. That led us last week to chapter 13. Chapter 13, the next two characters. And again, if we're doing numbers, if we're thinking 12, how do we remember what's in 12? What does 12 make you think of? 12 tribes, right? So what's the woman?
Israel.
That'd be Israel, made up of 12 tribes. Okay, so hopefully that'll be a connection point for you with 12. 13, we get to 13. We talked about this last week. We even talked about Friday the 13th and all of those ideas, but why hotels don't have a 13th floor and all that kind of stuff. But again, 13, we're thinking that's a bad number. Mm-hmm. So now after last week, you know what's in 13 and why we think 13 is a bad thing, because there's two characters there, and they are the Antichrist and the false prophet, okay? So now we've got 6 out of the 7 characters described to us in these chapters. 14, which is 2 times 7, is the chapter that we're starting tonight, and we will be introduced to our final personage by Dee.
Testing, testing.
I do see a green light, so I think we're good. Thank you, Tom. Good evening, everyone. We are going to get started with Revelation 14 tonight, and I think this is going to be one of my favorite chapters so far because this is the beginning. This is the second coming of Christ. So before we get started in verse 1, a quick contrast between what's going on in chapter 13 compared to chapter 14. In chapter 13, we went over last week. Satan's army has two beasts, and he has two objectives. His two objectives, since he's been cast out of heaven, he's now cast down to the earth. He can only blaspheme and deceive. His whole mission, his whole goal is to convince everybody that don't listen to Jesus, don't follow the God of Israel, follow the beast, worship his image. And he's also attempting, in verse 13, he convinces people to take the mark of the beast as well. The beast is worshipped by unbelievers in chapter 13, and they are, that unholy trinity, as Tom described it last week, they are given temporary victory over the saints, that the saints will be killed, or martyred, if you will. And in this chapter, when we get into it, we're going to see the consequences of them waging what is essentially a losing war against the saints of God. Because in chapter 14, we're going to see the Lamb, Jesus, and his army, the 144,000. We're going to see what they represent as servants of Christ, what their mission is, and not only that, how they're going to fulfill that mission during the tribulation. So we go ahead and get started in verse 1. Then I looked, and behold, a lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. Now, immediately you think back to last week that this was something that Satan imitated. That in order for people to exchange goods and services, they had to receive the mark of the beast on their hand. And so here we see that this is something that God has already done. In the very beginning of the tribulation, he sealed his 144,000 with his name on his forehead. And so John is essentially just paying homage to what he has already done, that we know that this is the same group of 144,000. And what is amazing here is if we think about this location, Mount Zion, it is very clear to see that this is not a made-up place. Mount Zion is referenced from the very beginning of Scripture, and we see it all the way in the end. It's Jerusalem. It's here on earth. There are many that will say, well, the second coming is about Jesus just, doing a new work in heaven, and it's not about him coming back to the earth. Well, if that were the case, we wouldn't have a physical location on earth to reference. He is coming back to the physical earth to redeem it. And he has, while he is on Mount Zion, he has his 144,000 gathered together with him. Now, if we remember in the first reference to this, there wasn't a specific location assigned to the 144,000. All we know is that they were from the 12 tribes of Israel, and there were 12,000. It doesn't say that they were all gathered in Jerusalem at one place to receive that seal. And that's very important because there are cults, that's what they are. There are cults who say if we follow these practices and we do these things and we imitate in this way, then we could be like these groups of people. But God doesn't say he had everybody gathered together in one place. And so this is the Lord choosing those who would receive his seal. In preparation for the final part of this war, this is just the beginning. This is the landing zone, if you will. This is the first time that the king himself has stepped onto the battlefield. If we see back the bowls, the trumpets, if we look at every judgment that's come before, this is simply God saying, let there be light, and there is light. Let there be war, and there is war. That's all that's been happening before. But now we have the general himself coming to the front lines, and it's going to be great. So we get into verses 2 and 3. And I heard a voice from heaven, like a voice of many waters, and the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps. They sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. Now, this is an amazing thing for John to witness, because in essence, this is the Holy Spirit enabling John to see both things that are happening at the same time. like he just described in verse 1, Jesus is now on earth. But John is able to hear three things. Number one, a voice from heaven. Number two, the voice like many waters. And number three, voice like loud thunder. And if we think about, because he references a new song being sung, if we think about chapters 4 and 5, it was all worship. So when John is describing, he's hearing just one voice from heaven, but then there's the voice of many waters, and then there's the voice of loud thunder. It's the succession of praise. Just like chapters 4 and 5, God is being praised more and more, and John is able to hear that by the power of the Holy Spirit. But then the crescendo of all those songs of praise and all those voices of praise is the sound of harpists playing their harp. Does anybody remember someone, maybe a king, in the Old Testament who used a harp? David. And so David used a harp as a means of calming Saul, because Saul would go on these fits and attempt to kill David. And whenever David played this harp, it would always calm Saul down. Now, this is a war script. The general has just stepped on the front line, so he has every intention of waging war. And yet, John hears harps being played, instruments of peace. It is an assurance of victory like no other. And so they sang, as it were, a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders. And no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. Now, in 4 and 5, we saw that the four living creatures had their song, Holy, Holy, Holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was, who is, and who is to come. The elders cast their crown before the throne, and they rendered praise unto the Father and the Lamb, and then all of creation came together and worshiped both of them. Each audience has a specific song that they're singing. And now we see that the 144,000 have a specific song that they're singing. So their song is going to be very, very different from the song of the four living creatures, the 24 elders, and all the rest of creation. Now, is there a way for us to figure out what that song might be, since they're the only ones that can learn it? I think we have some ideas, because he says, who were redeemed from the earth. This is a time period of the greatest persecution and the greatest difficulty of being a Christian in all of history. And these 144,000 have not only survived, they didn't just say, I'm going to hide in a bunker and I'm just going to wait this out. They were actively doing the will of God regardless of any consequence. Loss of life, loss of loved ones, loss of career. It didn't matter what they had to give up. They committed to doing the will of God through this time period. And so they have a song of redemption to sing, because they weren't just redeemed in the way that we've been redeemed, how we have received salvation and we have received the grace of God to do his will in this time. They have been redeemed even through the tribulation, even through the most difficult time of faithfulness that the earth will ever experience. And so they have a unique song to sing unto the Lamb and the one who sits on the throne. Verses 4 and 5, these are the ones who, describing the 144,000, these are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Now, when I was reading this, I was awed. I was like, what? The description of these men, I don't think are given so that we know what kind of Christians they were. I think this description is given as a reference directly to the type of song they might have been singing. Because when they have the opportunity to worship God, they're worshiping him, as Jesus described it, in spirit and in truth. Because there's this specific reference to there's no deceit found in them. But we're going to go piece by piece here. These were ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. This is the first characteristic. Now, if you were to go to the Old Testament, there is a prophet, I believe it's Ezekiel, if I remember right, in which the Lord is using Ezekiel to minister to Israel. Israel is currently backslidden in idolatry, and they are not serving God faithfully. And yet, through that, God calls them backsliders. He calls them adulterers, referring to the northern and southern kingdom at the same time. So he's saying that Israel is being unfaithful to me. But in his redemptive purpose, in his power to redeem, he simultaneously, by the mouth of the same prophet, calls them a virgin. And that is an amazing thing. And so when it says that these are ones who are not defiled with women, for they are virgins, there are a couple of ways you could take that. You could say, okay, they've been virgins since birth and they were virgins all their life. Or you could say that through God's redemptive purpose, he has redeemed them to separate them from whatever life they lived before, that they would serve him faithfully through the tribulation. And I think that is just as likely as the first option, because that is just how great his redemptive power is. And so the second characteristic, these are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Now, there's a couple of ways you could take this, because Jesus just now stepped onto the earth. He just arrived on Mount Zion in verse 1. So are they following him just when he arrives because they know that they're supposed to be gathered at Mount Zion in expectation for their coming king? Or is it that they have been following the leading of Christ to minister the gospel through whatever they might have to suffer? I think it's both. They are following him from beginning to end, just as he is faithful from beginning to end. And the third characteristic, these were redeemed from among men, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb. This principle of first fruits, I've most commonly heard in the church as relating to tithing and to giving. But if we look back in Genesis chapter 3, chapter 4, when Cain and Abel bring their sacrifices to the Lord, that is when we see the very first application of the principle of first fruits. Cain did not give his first from his cattle. He gave the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth. It doesn't matter. It just matters that it was not the first. And so God accepted Abel's offering, his sacrifice, because it was of the first, whether that be the first of the vineyard, the first of the crops. Abel was a farmer and Cain was a shepherd. So they have two different kinds of offering to bring, but it doesn't matter the kind, it matters your heart. And so that is what God is after with regard to the first fruit. So this first fruit principle, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb, there is a couple of ways we can look at that, but I'll just focus on one. Again, there's this reference to them being redeemed from among men. The same thing is said in verses 2 and 3. So this is a characteristic that John and that the Lord is emphasizing in their character, that the ones that the Lord chooses, they are elevated in status. Because in what you see this happen constantly in the Old Testament, Jacob is a perfect example of this. Jacob and Esau. Technically, Esau was the firstborn. So he should have received the spiritual inheritance of his father. But God did not choose Esau. He chose Jacob, the secondborn. And so where many people can get stuck on tradition and say, well, the firstborn is always the one to inherit the father's land, possession, business, whatever. God says, I will choose whom I will choose for my work and purpose. And so we see God's redemptive power even in that. And their fourth characteristic and final characteristic, and in their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. This, I think, is probably the most amazing aspect of this, because of all the other characteristics, the Lord has a redemptive application in their lives, that they are able to do the works of God because God has redeemed them. But for them to have no deceit in their mouth, that's a responsibility that they would take on. That is a demonstration of their commitment, because no deceit, specifically, what's their mission? Their mission is to share the gospel with anybody who has an ear. And so for them to have no deceit in their mouth, what that means is they never failed to share the truth of God. And that is a difficult, I can only imagine the suffering that they would watch others go through. Because at the same time that Satan is persecuting the saints and he has the authority to kill saints in chapter 13, God is also issuing out wrath. So we are seeing conflict and conflict and conflict. And so to have to pick a side in that and decide no matter what happens, who has to do what I have to give up, I'm going to do what my Lord has given me the mission to do. I'm going to follow my King. I'm going to follow the Lamb no matter what. And so their commitment is extreme. But these are you can think of these as the troops of God, the elite troops specifically, in the same way that the four living creatures are their own type of angels, and you have the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, they have their specific mission. These 144,000, being the first fruit, they were set apart for a specific sacrifice, and that is to serve in the tribulation. And we continue in verses 6 and 7. Then I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the seas and springs of water. This is an amazing thing, because even if you don't believe the prophets of God, even if you didn't hear it from the 144,000, here is God in his mercy offering another way of escape to anybody who will hear. Everyone knows by now that there is a conflict between spiritual powers, and one of them has to win. So everyone's aware that you have to pick a side. But instead of Jesus just wiping the slate saying, well, you decided to serve Satan, away with you, you're going to be cast down with him, he sends not only the 144,000, but now he even sends another angel to minister the exact same gospel as the previous. Now, in the midst of heaven is not as spiritual as it may sound. This is more of just referencing the atmosphere. So this is, you can think of it like actually planes in the air. If there was just an angel in the atmosphere up in the upper level of the sky, he's just ministering the gospel. Fear God, repent, believe in the one who is offering you salvation. And so he is declaring that everlasting gospel. And it's amazing because it is the truth that all other truths are predicated on. But I'm not going to get sidetracked. Verse 8, and another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Babylon, as we know, is one of the oldest nations in all of Scripture. It's, apart from Israel, actually, it's the only one that makes it from Genesis to Revelation. It's Israel and it's Babylon. And so Babylon, having become a fallen city, essentially this angel is now declaring victory. Babylon is fallen. Who made it fall? The Lamb, the general, the righteous one. And so the angel makes the proclamation of the defeat of the enemy. The enemy, one of the enemies, has been defeated. But he gives the reason why. Why must Babylon have fallen? Because if we think about this in contrast, there are actually two movies Hollywood made called Olympus Has Fallen. They made both of them right. I don't know why they made them right at the same time. But imagine hearing this from the world's perspective. If the world has to hear an angel declaring Babylon has fallen, well, that's like saying America has fallen. Well, Lord, I live in America. Are we sure this is the right time? So the world would have been thinking to themselves, we've lost such a great thing. We've lost our economic power. We've lost our influence. We've lost our resources. The world would be grieving. But here we have the angel of the Lord bringing a good tiding, because the king who came on Mount Zion has been victorious in accomplishing his purpose. And so there is one third and final angel in verses 9 through 11 who comes declaring another message. Then a third angel followed them, saying in a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast in his image and receives his mark on his forehead or on his hand, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb, and the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night who worship the beast in his image, and whoever receives the mark of his name. Now I'm only going to wrap up on verse 9, and then I'll let Tom take over from there. But there's a specific contrast right here. In verse 8, there is the wine of wrath in reference to Babylon of her fornication. But here, this third angel is declaring that he himself shall drink the wine of the wrath of God. This idea of wine being associated to wrath is specifically only found in Revelation, because when Jesus came, the very first miracle he did, turning water into wine. And when Jesus did that initially, what that represented is the wine represented blood. So Jesus was quite literally offering a new covenant by his blood. But here we see wine being associated with wrath. And so this has a different application here in Revelation. And then I believe I'll let Tom take it over from there, explaining their punishment.
Yeah, wine representing blood. Okay, now am I on? All right, now I'm on. Thanks. Took you a minute to get my attention, right? All right, here we go. Remember how Jewish a lot of what we're reading is. And if you remember chapter 11, right, you had the two witnesses, right? Why two? Do you remember the answer to that question?
Number of testimony?
Number of testimony, right? And it comes from Jewish law, which says every fact is confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses, okay? So here we have this, the king has landed, he's got his armies with him, right? They're just about to accomplish the task. And you notice what it says in 8, Babylon has fallen, as though it's already happened. But it's just starting to happen. It's just about to happen. And the purpose of this chapter is to talk about Jesus' arrival, because it's his part in the Great Tribulation, is to come and have victory. That's what the chapter is doing, essentially, right? So you have this angel saying, Babylon is fallen, as though it's already happened. That's called the prophetic voice, because it will happen. It's just about fixing to happen, right? So, but you have this verse 9 come, and it says, then a third angel. So again, if it's every fact is confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses, you already had 2. And then he even says, instead of just another angel, it says, okay, here's their third one. Nail it down. Every fact is confirmed. Here's your third angel. The third angel just nailed it down. And what does he say? If anyone worships the beast's image, receives his mark, he himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of, and this is very descriptive, wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength, right? Everybody's had a diluted something, right? I mean, you go buy fruit juice at the store, and some people say, well, it's too strong, it's too sweet, so put a little water in there, and then you drink it, it's like 50% water, and you're like, bleh, right? You had that kind of fruit juice? Okay, what is he talking about? The wrath of God, full strength. So again, it's this word picture of what it's going to look like when Jesus touches down at the front lines and says, okay, this is it. This is the end. So, poured out full strength into the cup of his indignation, he'll be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And while this verse 11 is an image, you want to think about it, because yes, it's an image in terms of this war script that we've been developing, but think about the idea. The smoke of their torment ascends for how long? Forever and ever, okay? Now, I don't know about you guys, but the fires that I've seen and the destruction that I've seen, isn't there an end to the smoke? Sooner or later it goes out. Sooner or later the fire goes out and then the smoke stops, right? So the idea here is, if the smoke ascends forever and ever, there's a reason. Because the fire's still going, okay? So, forever and ever is a long time. And he says, they have no rest day or night who worship the beast in his image and whoever receives the mark of his name. Now, before we go to verse 12, I just want you to think about what we've read so far, comparing it to chapter 13. Because chapter 13, you saw all this bad, the Antichrist and the false prophet and all the results of, blasphemy and evil and killing and death, right? And here it says, okay, here are the consequences, like Dee was sharing. The consequences are the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, right? And they have no rest day or night who worship the beast in his image. So no rest day or night. Just think with me there for one moment, right? If you have no rest day or night, what we shared when we talked about heaven and hell and the whole ideas around heaven and hell is the absence of every good gift and every perfect gift that has come down from above. If God is the one who gave all of those good things, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, right? God is the one who gave us all those good things. God is the one who, when we get up in the morning and we walk outside and we see all the green, and we see the horses walking across the field, and we see the different grains growing, and we just, you look around, and what does it bring to your eyes? It brings pleasure to your eyes, does it not? Yeah. I mean, we take in all of that goodness, and of course, many of us end up taking that for granted. Well, here the idea is all of that's taken away. And think about the words of Jesus, because he's just saying here, they have no rest day or night. Does that word rest bring a verse that Jesus said to your mind, maybe? Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Rest. Psalm 23, Lord is my shepherd, leads me beside, right? So, in any case, I could go on with that, but the idea here is this is a staunch contrast to what God is going to do for us. So, and he basically says that in verse 12. Here is the perseverance or patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And we already talked about the reason why he would have commandments of God and faith of Jesus. And put them together in Revelation, where he wouldn't do that. You wouldn't see a New Testament author do that in very, very many other places for a reason. But why does it say, here's the patience of the saints? We ran into this before, right? When did we run into it before? In chapter 13, when it was talking about the Antichrist and the false prophet killing people, right? Where the Antichrist was given authority to overcome the saints and to kill them, right? And we talked about the false prophet who made the image, and the image would kill anyone who didn't worship the beast, didn't take the mark and didn't worship the beast. The image would kill them. And then we have this statement, well, here's the perseverance of the saints. But it was right after another verse, and this is the other verse. He who takes into captivity will go into captivity. He who kills with the sword will be killed with the sword. Here's the perseverance of the saints. Do you remember this? Okay, so you have a pronouncement of judgment, and then you have a verse like this that says, here's the reason for the saints to persevere. Why? Because justice will be served. What did we just see? Right before that, he said, the smoke of their torment ascends forever and ever. They have no rest day or night. They'll be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. Here's the perseverance of the saints. Here's the reason. Here's your reason, right? Justice will be served. All right? Ready? All right. Let's roll. So we go on to verse 13. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works follow them. They may rest from their labors. So in contrast to those who will have no rest because they take the mark of the beast, those who die in the Lord, right, those saints, will rest from their labors. So, again, in that section, you have these three angels that are making these pronouncements as it's getting ready to happen. And now we're going to see it happen. But what I want you to look for, as we look through the last several verses, I want you to think about the number of messengers involved, okay? Because we just had these three angels flying over saying stuff. Verse 14. Then I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. Now, who's that guy? Jesus. That'd be Jesus. Okay, that's easy enough, right? So, all right, for those of you who are really astute, we talked about there are two different kinds of crowns, right? Yes. You have a victor's crown that's earned, and you have a royal crown that's based on your identity. In this context, which crown do you think Jesus has on? What's he about to do? He's about to have victory, isn't he? Okay? It's actually a Stephanos here. It's a golden Stephanos, or earned crown, or victor's crown. Okay? Which, we kind of scratch our head, but remember what the Antichrist was given at the beginning of the tribulation? He was given a victor's crown because he was about to go conquer, right? So here we have a picture of Jesus coming as a conqueror. And so coming as a conqueror, one who will have victory, he's given a victor's crown, okay? So just very unusual shift there, but that's why. He also has in his hand a sharp sickle. So, has anybody in the room besides me, and I know Nadia has, but anybody seen somebody work with one of those? Where the actual sickle is like, 6 or 7 feet long, and they just are doing like that, Yeah, so a few of us in the room, right? It's crazy. It's crazy. And then to look at the lawn, and you're going, my lawnmower couldn't have done that well, I mean, if the person's really good at what they're doing. And I was on the other side of the world when I saw that. But I mentioned that to say this is a very sharp blade that's meant to cut, right? So, all right. So here he comes. He's on this cloud. He has his victor's crown, and he's got a sickle. And another angel came out of the temple crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, "Thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap. For the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. Now, I don't know about you, for those people who say, okay, we're coming to the end, this is pretty clearly talking about the second coming. If it's something where it just was really involving Israel, something that already happened in history, why would they use a word like earth? Doesn't that sound global to y'all? That sounds global to me. The earth was reaped. So what's he talking about? Well, if you read Old Testament prophecy concerning the end times and the age to come, one of the things that Messiah must do before he sets up his kingdom is remove all of his enemies. All of his enemies have to be removed. Okay? All right. So, there we have that angel in verse 15. And he says, thrust in your sickle and reap, right? And this is some kind of a global judgment. And then in verse 17, another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And verse 18, another angel came out from the altar who had power over fire, and he cried with a loud cry to him who had the sharp sickle, the other angel, saying, thrust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So the angel thrust his sickle into the earth and gathered the vine of the earth and threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. Ouch, yeah, Scott says. And the winepress was trampled outside the city, and blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles for 1,600 furlongs. All right. What's the difference? I mean, I've read many commentaries that basically say this is just two different ways to talk about the same event. Do you notice some differences? Yes, okay. And the first one, very, very clearly, he's talking about a global judgment, right? The earth was reaped. Now, the way I would describe this is this first one is more like a grain harvest. That was a very broad coverage, and of course he tells us it's the earth, the entire earth that gets reaped, right? But isn't there one last battle? Yeah, where is that one last battle? That's called Armageddon, yeah, okay. And you know how big Armageddon is? Well, guess what? It's about 1,600 furlongs. Isn't that interesting? That he would distinguish between a global grain harvest, right, where the earth is reaped, and then when he describes this one, he says, thrust in your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, right? For her grapes are fully ripe. This is about a vineyard harvest, a local vineyard harvest, right? And again, we're talking about grapes. And then the wine press, the whole idea of the wine press. So very, very easy to see the war and the bloodshed and all of those kinds of ideas associated with wrath in the wine press, right? And the stomping of the grapes. So, but notice in verse 20, he says, wine press was trampled outside the city. What city? Remember how the chapter started? He's standing on Mount Zion. That's Jerusalem. Okay? So here it says the winepress was trampled outside the city. Well, what city? That'd be Jerusalem too. So where's Armageddon? Outside the city. Okay? So, I mean, do we need to do much of a stretch to say that this is talking about a physical battle that's going to happen in a physical place that's going to be near Jerusalem, and it is going to be the last final battle between God and his enemies? It's no stretch. No stretch. It's just another way to talk about it. Now, what about the blood came out of the winepress up to the horses' bridles? Yeah. Now, I mean, some of the pictures, some of the ideas that people get is like, okay, the blood was like, like going like this, and people, going around like this, and the blood. No, that's not the idea. The idea is that the bloodshed was so radical that it was, up to the level of the bridles of the horses. In other words, it was everywhere. There's blood everywhere, right? And I don't know about y'all, I've seen some movies where they get really graphic with that kind of stuff. It's not hard to imagine. And if what we're talking about is the last and final battle between Jesus and his enemies, the final removal of his enemies, in order to come to the place where he can freely set up his kingdom and reign, right? So that they need to be removed. This is it. That's the final one. So is it hard to imagine what that bloodshed will look like? Not if you watch some of the movies I've seen. Yeah. Right? All right. Well, I think that's good for chapter 14. I do want to say before we finish for the night, if you want to look at your notes on page 1, some of you, like me, I hope, are really, you like the tables thing and, contrasts and comparisons. And this between chapter 13 and 14, you really ought to be able to see, chapter 13 is about God's enemies, who's against him, and chapter 14 is about those who are for him, right? So in all those different ways, the comparison and contrast, this radical contrast. And so one of the ways I would invite you to think about it is compare last week and what was going through your mind when you were watching some of the videos that we shared, and how you felt after talking about the Antichrist and the false prophet for an hour, and how you should feel tonight after talking about the final victory of our Savior. Enemy is gone. The enemy's gone. He's got his victor's crown. Babylon has fallen, and he's ready to set up his kingdom. Right? So that's your difference between chapter 13 and 14. And beautiful that they're right next to each other with chapter 14 as the finale, right?